welcome to the Quarantimes. I'm your host Reema Gupta, and with me today I have Sudarsana Kundu, Co-Executive Director of Gender at Work. Welcome Sudarsana to this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So Gender at Work is an international network of experts that works on gender equality and inclusion. Sudarsana, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what are some of the projects that you do and a little bit more about the organization.
Sure, thanks, Reema. So as you've mentioned, we're an international organization. We're a network of experts who have a wide range of skills, from looking at sort of organizational development to evaluation and research. Our experts are spread out across all the way from Australia, of course Asia, and then in Africa and North America. We tend to work with systems, and these are systems in the sense of either organizational systems or groups of organizations, and sometimes with individual women's rights organizations. And the idea is to help them strengthen their gender lens in the way that they work, whether it is through their programs or whether it is in their workplace. So for example, a recent project that we finished is that we've been working with 9 unions in Africa, 9 teacher unions, and we've been working with them working with the union systems in Africa to help them think about how to address school-related gender-based violence. So those are sort of the kinds of work that we do.
Thank you so much for telling us about the organization. As you know, today's topic and focus of the conversation is going to be around the lockdown and the coronavirus impact. So, as you're aware, right, we are living in very unprecedented times. Coronavirus has disrupted all our lives. It's not a public health issue, but has become a major humanitarian and economic crisis. The impact of this virus has been felt throughout all strata of society, but particularly in India, we see a huge impact on the labor force, especially in the unorganized sector. What is your perspective on the impact of this lockdown on unorganized labor force?
Yeah. So, I think there are 2-3 levels of impact, right? One is the most immediate. We know, for example, that, roughly about 90% of India's labor force is in the unorganized sector, right? And it's about 40% of your GDP, right? That's what the data tells us. Now, because of this lockdown, there is no income that's in the hands of this labor force, right? And in the absence of savings, because these are not people who actually have any savings, and in the absence of a social protection system, which is government supported or even private sector supported, they are really they're struggling with daily sustenance, right? That's what's going to happen, and that's what's happening right now. In the immediate, they're not able to provide for food, they're not able to provide for rent in their own locations, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing sort of this mass exodus that's happening to rural areas from the cities, right? The second impact that's going to happen is the sort of in the long term, right? Now, the unorganized sector, by their entire sense, it means that they actually are the ones who are most likely to get into financial distress, right? The organizations and the businesses themselves don't have any savings, they don't can't depend on loans, all of that, and it's likely that they'll actually collapse and then die, right? And maybe some of them will come back, but many of them will not. So what actually is going to happen is that you'll have high levels of unemployment of women in the or men and women in the unorganized sector, right? And the third impact that we're seeing is in the farming and the agrarian sector. It depends largely on the unorganized sector. You're right now in the middle of the harvesting season, and you really don't have farm labor, right? So how are we going to even do harvesting? It has huge implications, not for just them who are not going to get food, but in the long term, it is implications for food for everyone in the country, right? So those are, I think, what what we will have to kind of grapple with it at different levels.
Sure. So it's not just like we go into a coma and suddenly wake up and everything is back to normal.
Yeah.
According to you, there'll be many levels of impact. Short term, of course, we
Yeah.
are already on the ground,
Yeah.
but it's going to be.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, what we're hearing is that we're moving into a very long-term recessionary phase, right? And that's the while we're grappling with providing food on the table and all of that right now to the unorganized sector, I think that's going to be where we really need people to come together and think about what are we going to do, how are we going to respond to this.
Sure. So building on this, Sudarshana, so you mentioned that the unorganized is a large labor force pool. It's 90%. My question is, the women themselves out of this unorganized labor pool, also there's a large representation of women, right? They're about 60 to 70% is the numbers that I've heard who are women working in unorganized sector. And, of course, it presents, UN just came out with a report of challenges when you look at it from a gender perspective. And women are bearing the double brunt, right? One is that, of course, the labor force, because of unemployment, there's going to be less money available to them in their hands. The second is, of course, they are on the front lines. When we look at especially healthcare workers, you have a lot of women in those jobs. And so they are fighting on the front lines. And third, and not the least, is, of course, the unpaid labor, the work that we do at home, and now it has increased in scope. And so the women are facing a double whammy, and there's a lot more challenge to them. What are your thoughts in terms of the impact of this on women? How can we come out stronger?
So you mentioned the UN Women Report, and and they've kind of also released a whole bunch of data along with that, right? And that's a great resource to look at. So one is, as you said, the healthcare workers are predominantly women globally, right? There is a healthcare risk in the first place that we have to think about for women, right? Women, a large proportion of the healthcare workers, therefore, who will be affected by COVID in terms of getting COVID infected, will also be women, right? And we've only got data from Spain from that report, which says 70% of the healthcare workers who are infected are actually women. But there is going to be also impact on access to healthcare, right? There will be impact on maternal mortality. Women we know are, in terms of there is gender disparity in terms of access to healthcare. Now, if you are unwell, what is your chance of being taken to a primary healthcare center or a hospital if you're living somewhere else? If you're pregnant, what's now going to happen in terms of institutional delivery, right? The number of institutional deliveries also will see a reduction right now, right? That there is a direct impact on the health and survival of women in the first place. In terms of the second impact is going to be is what's happening right now, which is about at two different levels. With the professionals, women are having to balance the household burden, care burden, and work, right? Which is kind of a struggle for many. And the second is that the unorganized sector is collapsed. As you said, women are not going to have income in their hands. But again, in sort of the long run, and we know if you also look at the formal labor force participation rate, we know that women in India comprise only 26% of the formal labor force participation rate, right? Now, when the economy goes into a tailspin and there are layoffs and some rehires, who's going to get laid off and who's going to get rehired, right? If you have two income earners, who's going to actually go out to work, right? It is going to be, the social norms dictate that it is going to be the male who's going to get rehired, or who's going to go out and get employment. So we're going to see in the law, in sort of the immediate, in the medium term, I think my estimate would be that there would be again a fall in women's labor force participation, right? Both in the unorganized sector, but also in the organized sector, right? And in the third is that we're not necessarily seeing a gendered lens in the COVID response, in the humanitarian response in many countries, and that's going to have impact. You look at kids that go out in very small way, kids that go out, you do not see sanitation hygiene products in those kits, right? These are essential products, but we never think about putting a Kotex or putting a Whisper into those hygiene kits, right? So what's going to happen to their health and emotional problems, and there's this whole aspect of what's happening to women right now as we're kind of talking about it. But in the long term, that's kind of, we really have to think about how are we going to get these women back into employed zones.
Echo your sentiment. I've been thinking about it a little bit as well, and I was applauding actually India's effort when it talked about gender parity, especially when you look at the education, right? Because a lot of girls are getting into higher education, and we are finally making a crack in that particular number and measurement. But yes, when you talk about labor force participation, it has been dismal. India is among the lowest, as you rightly said, 26%. And sadly, it's going to dip even further. And maybe my question is and again, one of the other concerns when we look at the overall Indian economy has been the MSME sector, because there are a lot of women who are employed in the small and micro enterprises. And as well as, now with technology and a lot of the technology services, technology being leveraged to provide services, what we call the gig economy, right? There are a lot of gig economy workers, and I thought that was kind of a silver lining for women employment. Do you feel there is an area that could potentially be a silver lining, especially when we talk about maybe work from home, right? A lot of organizations, both organized and unorganized sector, have been forced to look at work from home, and they are experimenting with different technologies and different ways of making the people more productive from home. Do you feel it will be a silver lining for the women's labor force participation?
This was an area that we were actually actively looking at even before the economy and the lockdown was happening, in terms of there is this entire conversation around future of work in the global south, and we were wondering whether the gig economy is it, and the gig economy is again at different levels, right? There is a whole set for professionals like us, like who are working from home, and it opens up in freelancers and all of that. And there is this entire set that we were also kind of thinking about what happens to your urban flap and your, them, right? There is a whole movement there as well, right? So there are, again, around the spectrum, there's a whole bit, right? It's going to be, we'll have to really study this, but I think it's going to be mixed bag, because you still have a large section of Indian women who are in sort of construction, in agriculture, right? Which is either or self-employed, which is like you make legit not legit, but papad, and sell it, or pickles and sell it, and all of that kind of rural industries, small SME, which is in the rural sector, right? And they're self-employed, right? Is that likelihood of what's going to happen there? The work from home model doesn't work there at all, right? So there's a huge population which is going to really will miss from this kind of a digital explosion that's going to happen, and it's going to and my worry in that sense is also, and I don't want to sound like a pessimistic kind of person, but we're also going to move to labor-saving devices. So factories are going to think about how do we reduce our, dependence on labor. I know households like ours are, already thinking about, oh, what other labor-saving devices should we have bought and didn't right? Oh gosh, that vacuum cleaner would have been really handful right now, right? All of those. So then all we'll all of us are really already starting to think about what are going to be labor saving measures, and that will really, whether domestic household labor or whether it's these factory manufacturing, agricultural, all of that, and that might really not uh, be good for women who are at the bottom of the workforce. Now, if you're skilled, whether it's whether it's salon skilled in that sense, right? Whether it's a salon provision or whether it's freelance graphic designer and all of that, the work from home does, I think, is a place, and I think there is a, a positive hope there, that will generate more employment, especially when we know that maybe the companies may not be able to absorb full-time labor. It is quite possible then that it will open up some doors and some opportunities for women who are able to provide part-time employment uh, to to these formal organizations, as well as the fact that what we would need to really study and assess is possibly if this is going to lead to a wage dip, because now that we are, you're voluntary offering your services part time, and what is your ability to negotiate those rates? Uh, right now, when we were seeing, I think it was quite a positive situation. We, whatever stories and anecdotes that we gathered so far, is that women had the agency, the power to actually negotiate. They were working longer hours for sure, but they were able to generate higher incomes. They had greater mobility, and some of those stories were really wonderful, at least in the Indian context. But we really have to think about what's going to happen and whether it will remain. But we'll have to really think about some kind of labor protection and social security measures for them.
No, and I think I agree with you that, of course, technology was making us think anyway a lot about automation, and a lot of companies were thinking about it. I think
Right.
just this has kind of accelerated, pushed like the pedal,
Absolutely.
which we thought would take
Absolutely.
some time for adoption and for changing processes. Now companies are accelerating their technology adoption and roadmap. And I think that's something for us to think about then what happens, how do we reskill the labor? And
Absolutely.
and I
How
know
do
that.
we reskill women? And one of the things I know, sorry, Rima, one of the things that I've been really thinking about, what is right now at COVID, what are the services that we're really demanding? And I think we were demanding that even before, but more so. We are demanding sort of at-home delivery services like the Amazons, the Ubers, and the Swiggies. Now,
Sure.
who gets those? People with scooters, people, who are mobile. And in India, the general norms, and globally, the general norms are such that you do not drive like a bike or whatever, right? So unless we really change some of those and which is possibly where you're going to next, and really reskilling in that sense, where you're kind of really thinking about how do we challenge stereotypes in livelihoods and gender skill training and all of that, will not. This will bypass them.
Sure. And exactly. So I think you are going down the next question, which is exactly that, right? So how do we reskill, right? Re-equip ourselves. I mean, there is a large labor force. There is a very active, I think, very hardworking labor force in women. And how do we empower? What is the next set of tools that we need to give them, right? To make them maybe more mobile, maybe more technology savvy. Are there two or three key areas that you look at when you look at an organized sector? And I know that you do a lot of development and training. Are there like three skills that you could pick that you think that, hey, for the next generation, post COVID, the world has changed, and these are three things that everyone will need?
Yeah, overall, I think that, and I know we've heard this from the US a lot about STEM, right? And India, we have this idea that women do go into science, but I do not think they go into science and engineering in the same way, right? to really, if they go into science and engineering to get a very basic kind of a job, right? Now, how many of these women are really, we have to kind of encourage them at that college education stage to kind of think about taking up some of those areas that are going to be there, right? We know AI is going to be something that's here to stay, right? And if you actually, we just did a quick a scan recently, and that's why we were trying to look at the number of heads or CEOs of companies who are in AI, sort of heads of data analytics firms and all of that, predominantly male, right? Uh, Not unlike any other area, right? But that's it. We have to really think about data analytics, think about AI, some of these kind of areas that women have to kind of actually get, and that's at an engineering school level, at a science school level, that's at your tertiary education system level. The second bit of it is, I think we need to really do an assessment, and that would be something that, we'll be happy to have conversations with other people, is to really have an assessment of what are some of the skills that other sectors, like, non-STEM sectors, like manufacturing, sort of the new economy areas. What are the skills that we're looking at, right? And what are sort of the skills and competencies that those jobs require, which is like mobility and all of that. I think, and this is something that we are possibly seeing a little of with some, non-profits who are into skilling, that they are actually now into skilling of women, getting them to learn how to drive. I think that's an amazing kind of thing. I wish that kind of thing, but it's really to actually do a gender analysis of this skilling training that's happening right now, and seeing and really shifting it and trying to kind of move the balance a little bit in skill training. So I think that is a big initiative across that requires, like, let's say, the government, the policy, the center, and non-profits at the bottom to kind of come together and do. And the third really is for women's. I think something that they would, and is I feel at an individual level, is sort of financial skills. That they need to learn how to kind of save, plan, manage, and kind of do that, because that's something that I think the financial industry will be here. So if you get some financial skills, that's a good. I mean, you can possibly stay there. But it's also really important for women at an individual level to actually uh, for their own independence and survival.
Sure. So no, I think those are great points. So my last question is, like, we are also talking about coming out from the lockdown. Of course,
Right.
some of it has been extended to make sure that we are safe, and we do see the downward trend of the virus spread. But people are slowly talking about how do we bring the economy back, how do we
Mm.
restart, and so my question to you is, what are some of the things that you feel have permanently changed, and our perspective on them have changed, right? And so it's no longer going back to how we used to work, but there are some things that have triggered a new thinking process, a new perspective on the way it works, and we will have to adopt to that new change. And again, from a government perspective, because you work a lot from policy and you work internationally, you might have seen some best practices that you feel are rays of hope, and that can help bring more gender parity rather than taking us on the downward slope of labor force participation of women. So are there specific recommendations or policy considerations that you feel maybe there are a couple of things that if the government did, we would come out more on the positive?
You're right. So one thing I think, you've alluded to it. Work from home is here to, I feel, is here to stay, right? I think corporates are seeing how fast that they've been able to equip their own employees, and that they're kind of coping badly, maybe because they don't have the support system at this point, but coping and managing. And some of them I know are like working 8 to 8, and all of that is also happening, right? So I feel that that's really definitely changed the way that we will work. There will be, you know, uh, companies will be more open to work from home kind of systems and all of that. So that's definitely uh, there there to stay. Um, there is also, as I said, I mean, one of the things will be that this will move us into a higher automation kind of it will move into how much more of Zoom and what else kind of apps are we going to use, and project management systems which get your task, and AI will be used to kind of do you. They'll be thinking about monitoring. How do I kind of make sure that the employees are logging in time, or they're checking my mails on time, and all of that. That's going to happen a lot more. It's not as if this was not happening. It's, as you said, it's accelerated by this completely. So this is a second, I think, big trend that's going to happen. I feel that the delivery services is actually going to go on the rise. We know that Amazon stock has increased, while all our stocks are going down. Their stocks have actually continued to rise. So that's going to be, I think, the model. So, one of the other impacts this is going to happen is that men are also going to be unemployed. We'll have, and some young boys who are going to come out of college or come out of school will be left with no jobs, because we are moving into a situation where there's deceleration of the economy, the GDP is going to shrink. What happens to these young boys and what young men who are going to now sit or be idle, right? Who are unprepared for the situation. What happens to them, because their emotions are, we've not prepared them to process their emotions. They'll be angry, they'll be hateful, they will not know who to direct this anger and hate towards. And imagine what this is going to do for the safety and security of young girls and women who are supposed to be out on the streets in public, and their mobility and their access to public spaces in the coming years. We have to, as a policy, as way of engaging, we have to engage with young men and boys, helping them both to process these emotions of anger and rage that they are bound to feel, and get them to kind of think about how to meaningfully engage them into some other kinds of work. This is going to be something that we'll definitely have to deal with. It's something that we're really consciously aware. We're thinking about working with nonprofits who work with young men and boys to see how they're going to respond to the immediate challenges that COVID is going to impose on us.
No, I think very important point you made, Sudarshana. I truly feel that yes, we need to think about the safety of our women and young girls, and we don't want a repeat of Nirbhaya case ever again in our country. Hopefully, right, the government builds up on this. I think we had some very good thinking. Part of it is, as you said, to strengthen the implementation of some of the schemes that are already there. Great, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rima.
Yeah.